Hello everybody, and welcome to a special video. I thought of what I should do in celebration of 100 subscribers, and what more original is there to do than make a tier list, am I right? I know I say that jokingly, but I figured it'd be a fun thing to do, is make a tier list of this game. Since it's one of my most played, I probably have a lot of wrong opinions, but that's okay. So yeah, let's get started. So it's organized into 5 tiers: top, high, mid, low, bottom. I don't like working with more than 5 tiers. I think 5 is the perfect amount. So that's why I have 5 tiers. Mid is the average unit, low is the below average, bottom's way below average, like the worst units in the game, and likewise high is above average by quite a bit, and top is the best units in the game. So I guess I should probably provide examples. So let's see. I'd say an example of a top tier unit would obviously be Rutger. Some of the best combat in the game, really good availability, and best boss killer in the game. I think that's a given. Won't be a very controversial pick. And as an example for bottom tier, where are you? Wendy. I don't really need to say why Wendy's awful, and one of the worst units in the game. It just is. 4 movement, abhorrent bases. Even in normal mode, she's not going to do anything. As for mid-tier, I'd say a good example is Wolt. Well, not Trek, Wolt. You have him from the beginning of the game. He does his job. Those are the most accurate, or not the most accurate, because that'd be anima magic. But they're accurate to range. He does decent chip damage early on. He's free to deploy in the first 5 chapters. So even if you're not using him long term, you're still going to get use out of him. Now, as for low tier, I'd say an example would be Bors. Just like Wolt, you have him from the beginning of the game. He's freely deployed in the first 5 chapters. But being an armored unit, he has 4 movement. This doesn't mean he's completely worthless, because in those 5 chapters he certainly can do stuff. He can bait enemies, he can take a hit or 2 if he needs to, even in hard mode. And he can go visit villages, enough said. He's not worthless, like, say, Wendy. He's worth something, but not a lot. In a normal run anyways. If you're doing armors only, he's the MVP, but that's not what we're talking about here. And then for high tier, I'll say Shauna's high tier. Very mediocre combat, but she's a purely utility unit, or mostly utility. You can promote her by Chapter 8, and she'll perform very well against axe users, because very fast sword user, flyer. But the best thing she does is pick up units, fairy units, rescue, stuff like that. Alright, so now that we have the first unit in each category, I will be organizing within categories, or I'll try to. It probably won't be too easy to do so, but we'll certainly try. Alright, so I guess I may as well go in order. I'd say Roy is low tier. You do have him from the beginning of the game. He is force deployed. He does contribute for what it's worth in some scenarios, but his promotion way too late. I don't count seizing as a positive, because that's kind of silly. Like, if you counted seizing as a positive, then every lord and every game would be top tier. So no, we're not doing that. We're just looking at him purely as a unit. And if you're playing fast, or trying to, most of the time he's not even going to see combat, because you're just going to be picking him up. But he's still not awful. He's not worthless, he's a sword user. Swords are the best weapon type in FE6. So he can't be bottom tier. He's okay, or a little worse than okay. He's certainly bad, but not awful. Alright. I'd say, this is kind of difficult. I'd say as a mid-tier, Lou is also a mid-tier. He's probably the best unpromoted tome user in the game, because he has decent availability. He's sort of like Magic Wolt. He's freely deployed. He does his job. You can use him long-term if you want to, and he won't be awful long-term. But, yeah, not really too much to say about Lu. He's pretty average. Pretty mediocre. Kind of hard to rate Thieves. So I'll probably leave Thieves and Merlinus for last. I'd say Marcus is probably at the bottom of top tier. He's basically mandatory if you're trying to play the early chapters optimally on hard mode. And even not optimally, you're kinda need to use this man a bit. Well, he's not necessary, but he speeds up the process with an Iron Sword. He exactly leaves enemies at like 1 to 3 HP in Chapter 1 so that you can feed them to Alan, Lance, or even Roy or Walt if you want to. So yeah, I'd say Marcus, he does drop off starting the later mid-game. But I'd say his contributions in early game make him top tier. Alright. Now, might be controversial to put these two in top tier as opposed to high, but they're your Chapter 1 calves. You have them for the whole game, they contribute early on, and they only get better as you train them. The only downside, I'd say, is that one of them will always promote before the other, because your first Night Crest is in Chapter 8, and you won't be able to promote the other one until after, what, Chapter 15, I want to say? Yeah. Yeah, until after Chapter 15. So one of them will always be ahead of the other. It's sort of personal preference, which one's better between these two, but I think it's widely, or generally considered Lance is better than Alan, because his speed is better, which means he will double sooner. Although I will add that both of them eventually do start doubling, and at that point, Alan, I'd say, is better, because he hits harder and is slightly bulkier. But I'll just leave them right next to each other. It doesn't really matter which one's ahead of the other. I'd say Marcus. I'll put Marcus behind them, but Marcus is still top tier for sure. Alright, alright. Let's see. I guess I may as well put Lot and Wade. Lot's definitely better than Wade. I'd say Wade... I want to say Wade's above Roy. Lot's a solid mid-tier, because he's more accurate than Wade. He's only by like 5 or 6 points of accuracy if I remember correctly, but that means a lot. If you're gonna use a halberd, it's going to be on Lot, it won't be on Wade. Because Wade simply isn't, he's less accurate. And axes in FE6 are inaccurate. But again, just like Lu, just like Wolt, just like Bors, most of their use comes from being freely deployed in chapters 2, 3, 4, 5. So even if you're not planning on using them long term, they always will contribute, and I'll say Lot contributes slightly more, or quite a bit more. Not quite a bit more, but he contributes more than Wade. Wade isn't quite as good. Wade's speed will never be good. In fact, he might even be doubled by quite a few enemies later on, but FE6 enemy quality, while it is pretty high, super fast enemies aren't the most common. Let's say Wade is typically safe from getting doubled, but still shaky. Long-term, Wade is definitely worse than Lot. But not by a lot. Alright, alright, alright. Next is Dorothy. I may as well rate her, since I've already rated Wolt. Well, she's sort of hard to rate. I'll put her below Lot. I'd still say she's mid-tier. She's pretty difficult to rate. Yeah, she's still mid-tier. She joins right before a map with 3 very scary enemies, very scary wyverns. If you train her, she'll on average have slightly better offenses than Walt, I believe. But she's around for less chapters, which is why she's quite a bit worse than Lot is. Or, I mean Walt. Well, Lot too. She's around for less time. Their bases are slightly better than Wolt's, but only slightly, to the point where if Wolt even gets like 2 levels, Like, he just chips 20 things in the 5 chapters he's around for before Dorothy joins, then he'll typically edge her out in terms of stats, but she's still pretty solid. She's definitely a decent unit. You can train her if you'd like. I'd say she's definitely at the very bottom of mid-tier. She's below average, I'd say, but not by enough to be in low tier. Although arguably she and Wade could trade places, but no, I'm going to stick with it. Alright, so another top tier unit, I say, is Saul. For purely utility, C base staves, whereas Ellen has D, Lorene has D. So he immediately has an edge over them. He also has a higher base level than those two. I think his base level is 4, I want to say. So that's what, only 50-something heals to get to promotion level, as opposed to Ellen requiring quite a few more. Chlorine joins at like level 1 or 2. He's overall just better than those two. Better bases. Chlorine only beats him out in movement. Ellen doesn't really beat him out in anything besides luck. But again, he's not a frontline unit. He doesn't need luck because he shouldn't be taking hits. He's purely a staff user. So speaking of Ellen, I think she's at the bottom of high tier. She is a staff unit. She does have staff utility. She's the first one you get. So she's not bad by any means. She's quite good. The problem is she's vastly outclassed by most other staff users in the game, besides, say, promoted mages. Obviously aren't going to compare, because they only get E-staves on promotion. Yeah, it still shows she's decent. If you train her, I think on promotion it gives her +1 weapon rank. So she can eventually warp. She won't get to warp rank with as much ease as Saul would, because his staff rank is better, but after 100 staff uses and a promotion, she will be able to warp, whereas Saul just needs 50 staff uses and a promotion. But again, she does join earlier than Saul, so she can get slightly ahead on her staff uses. She might be at like 12 or 15 by the time Saul joins. She could get to C by the time he joins, but that will be pretty difficult. Anyways, let's go and rate Deke. I'd say he's high tier. One of the best Hero Crest units in the game, though he doesn't quite compare to Rutger. He's a sword user, he joins early on. It's basically a lot of positive traits without being super good. He's very good, but not top tier. So I think he's around the top of high tier. Probably about the second, third best Hero Crest unit in the game. So his only other competition, I'd say, is Rutger, and then OJ or Ogier is in the same class as him, but Ogier is definitely quite a bit worse. Where are you, Ogier? Here he is. I say Ogier, low tier, sword user. He joins in Chapter 8. His bases are pretty mediocre, especially for his join time. I believe they're comparable, if not worse, to Deke's bases, and he joins 6 chapters after Deke. The only real positive about him is that he's a sword user. He can use Armor Slayer at base. Armor Slayer is pretty good for the chapter he joins in. But besides that, he's not particularly good. I'd put him maybe even below Roy. Speaking of his starting squad, I'd say Barth is at the very bottom of low tier. He's not as bad as Wendy, for sure, but he's not even close to Bors. So there's quite a gap between Bors and Barth, because Barth joins way later with only slightly better stats. He has comparable stats to Bors, really. Like, I guess he's closer to promotion. But if you want to promote a general, you just use Bors, who you get way earlier. So really, Barth is, all 3 Armor Knights are pretty trash, but Wendy's definitely the worst, Bors is definitely the best. Alright. Let's see here. As an easy high tier, or easy top tier unit, I'd put Milady in top tier. Probably better than Marcus. She joins when Marcus starts to become bad, sort of. But I'd say being really good in the early game, is better than joining in the late mid game and being really good from there on. Because the early game is more important to be good in. So I'd say she's still top tier. She still has some of the best combat in the game. She's one of the best classes in the game. She has really everything going for her, except for mediocre availability. But I'd say despite that, she has so many positive qualities that joining halfway through the game is not a detriment in the slightest to her. Alright, next, let's see. I'd say Zeus. Zeus is definitely low mid-tier. He joins later than Milady, and if I remember correctly, he joins at what, like level 9? I don't think he can promote at base, so you do need to actually train him a little before promoting him, if I remember correctly. It's not that difficult, his bases are pretty darn good, but he doesn't join until around the end of Chapter 16. So as far as flyers go, he's on the weaker end. His availability isn't that good. His combat is good, but not amazing. Overall, I'd say he's a pretty mid-tier character. Let's see, another top tier. Mr. Percival, he has insane bases. You don't need to use a promotion item on him. And yeah, what more can be said? If you know who this man is, you just know he's top tier. You know what he's made of. Just insane bases, really good weapon ranks. He has what, like 20 strength, 20 speed, with pretty good bulk. Yeah, you just don't need to invest in this man at all. He's just godly from the get-go. And 0% growths, he still, like, one round a bunch of things. So yeah, hard mode Percival is utterly amazing. Can't go wrong with this guy. It's pretty crazy. Alright, alright. So next, I'd say you can put the dancers. They're obviously in top tier. Being able to refresh a unit's pretty good. It allows for you to pull off more warps. It allows you to do more one turns. It's just, having dancers is always a really good thing, as long as you have at least one really good unit. I'd say dancers are as good as your best unit, because literally they make your best unit move again if you'd like them to, so yeah, I'd say dancers are as strong as the strongest member of your team. And with that being said, they will then be one of the strongest members of your team, always. Alright, alright, let's see here. Cecilia. Okay, she's top of mid-tier, I'll say. No investment, she comes promoted as a Valkyrie. She has decent base staff rank, I believe it's C. She has decent base combat. She's all around very decent, she's in a good class. She'll be able to chip, she'll be able to do pretty good chip to Wyverns, as she can use Air Caliber at base. I'd say she's probably the best anima user in the game. Actually, not probably, she just is. She's definitely not any better than the top of mid-tier, but she's the perfect filler unit. She can heal, and a mounted healer at that, and she can chip things you need her to. What more do you need in a pre-promoted filler mage, really? Alright, next up, I'd say Jarrett, top of high tier. The problem with Jarrett is that, well, not the problem, his bases are very slightly better than Marcus's. However, he joins 7 chapters after Marcus does. By the time you get Jarrett, your team should already be starting to get really strong, to the point where you don't need a pre-promoted paladin. However, that doesn't take away from Jarrett's strength. His base stats are still very respectable, his combat's very respectable, everything about him is pretty good. But again, like Marcus, he does fall off. He'll fall off slightly later than Marcus, I'll say, due to having slightly better stats, but he's basically just Marcus with less availability, and even then not by significantly less. So yeah, Jarrett, I'd say top of high tier is a good place for him. Maybe below Deke. Below Deke, I'll say. And Shauna. Yeah, sure. I think that's a good place for Jarrett. Alright. Now let's say Trek. Trek is a very middle-of-the-road unit. He's a Cavalier. He's a very good class. He's a very middling unit, though. His bases aren't superb. They're very decent, not superb. His growths don't matter a ton, but for a unit, and most unpromoted units, they do matter quite a bit, unless their bases are super stellar. Very mediocre growths, very mediocre bases, really good class, pretty good availability, although he will never hold a candle to Lance or Allen. But yeah, I'd say Trek, very middle-of-the-road unit, very mid-tier. Nothing really else to say. You definitely promote him before you promote any Armor Knight, but I'd say he's the worst Cav in the game, for sure. Can't hold a candle to the top tier ones, can't hold a candle to his comrade Noah. Who I'd say is, where should I put Noah? I'm considering bottom of high tier, or near the top of mid. Okay, near the top of mid, I'd say. The gap between Trek and Noah isn't that massive. It isn't a tier's worth, I'd say. Noah is sort of like Trek in that he's a filler Cav, but his bases are respectable to the point where even if you've trained Allen and Lance, you'd still want to field Noah, whereas the same might not be said for Trek. You can still field Allen, Lance, Percival, Jarrett, Noah, and Trek, of course, but I'd say if you're going to bench any Cav, it'd be Trek. Whereas with Noah, strong base sword rank right before the Western Isles, where there's tons of axe-using enemies. So he's good there. His base level's good. I forget exactly what his level is. I think it's around 6, 5, something like that. So he doesn't take a ton of training. And of course, his availability is pretty good. I'd say there's not a lot going against Noah, although he's not a standout unit by any means of the word. Alright, next up, let's see. Sue. I'm considering putting Sue at the top of mid-tier, maybe above Cecilia, bottom of high. It's hard to say. Right before Noah, let's say, right below Noah. Her bases, compared to Dorothy and Walt, her bases are quite a bit better. She's fast, though her base level is only 1, if I remember correctly. However, she's a fast bow user, which automatically makes her pretty useful against Wyverns. She joins right before the Wyvern chapter. She'll probably do as good against them as Walt would, unless you've been training Walt pretty hardcore. Her availability's decent, mounted. She has quite a bit going for her, sort of like Noah, but he's not particularly strong in any way. Alright, let's see. Ah, I know. Lilina. Lilina doesn't have anything going for her, really. She's still better than Wendy. She's still better than, where are you? Sophia, of course. But, I'd say these three are definitely bottom 3 units. They don't have really anything going for them. I think if Lilina switched places with Lou, switched recruitment with Lou, she'd be in his tier. But, no, she joins in Chapter 8. You won't even get to use her until near the end of Chapter 8 when you rescue her. And she's just awful. You need to invest a lot into her if you'd like to use her long-term. You want to promote her. Let's say if you do manage to use her long-term, she's decent. If you manage to get her promoted, she's a decent healer, despite E staves. Just because her magic is so high, she can top people off with heal pretty well. But, yeah, again, it's just, why would you use her? You have so many better options. Why would you use her? And as for Sophia, she's like Lilina, except she joins way later. So, like, what? Why? Why do you exist, Sophia? I think she's level 1, she has really awful bases, just like Lilina does. Nothing going for it. Plus she uses Dark Magic, which is less accurate than Anima. And her base skill is really bad, so her hit rates are going to be very shaky against literally everything. So training her is a massive endeavor. Your payoff isn't even that big. Your payoff is like, her 2020 stats are comparable to Ray's, who you get, what, like 2-3 chapters earlier than her. And he can promote at base, because he's base level 10. I believe base level 10 anyways. I just know he can promote at base, because I did in my Armors Only run. Yeah, I'd say Ray near the bottom of mid-tier. He's definitely helped out by the fact that he can promote at base, so you can use him as a staff bot if you'd like, although E-base staves is pretty bad. But his combat's very decent. The problem is, why would you guiding him when you could guiding ring any of your other healers? Any, like, actual healer to get them extra staff rank, while he just gets an E. And plus, why would you use him over Lu, who's been around for longer, and could easily be level 10 or above if you're actually using him? So yeah, I'd say Ray, below average, but not necessarily bad. Can use Nosferatu at base for what it's worth. And yeah, that's really all there is to be said about Ray. Alright, let's see. Geese. Geese is definitely near the top of low tier. He's very okay. He's pretty easy to promote. He promotes the Berserker. Berserker's a pretty decent class. His bases are just below average overall. Like, they're not irredeemable. They're just not good at all. He joins about halfway through the game. He's sort of like Gonzalez in that he's promotes into a Berserker and he's very just in his base class. It's kind of hard to compare him to Gonzalez, or it's kind of hard to decide which one of these two is better. Geese does have better skill, however Gonzalez gets more skill and promotion. Gonzalez definitely has better offensive stats, aside from skill, of course. Plus, Gonzalez can insta-promote if you go B route, because his level is above 10, whereas in A route, I forget which level he is. I think he's like 4 or 5, somewhere around there. So he does take investment in half the routes. However, his bases are good enough to the point where he will double things, will hurt things, but he really needs a promotion to get going. He does get, what, +5 skill on promo? That helps him a lot, so I'd say B route Gonzalez better than Geese, A route Gonzalez worse than Geese. But they're both not stellar units, I'd say. They're just alright. Alright, next up, let's see. It's like Clarine is high tier. She joins around the same time Ellen does. She's a better class than Ellen. However, her magic is worse than Ellen's, making her slightly worse in terms of using staves like Warp, status staves, using Physic. Her range will be lower. However, I wouldn't hold that too much against her, but it is definitely something to take note of. I'd say the difference in their classes makes her better than Ellen, but she's definitely not amazing. She's she's a staff user you get early on, so you obviously can't go wrong there. But neither of those two really compare to Saul. Honestly, Clarine I'd say is moderately worse than Cecilia. No. The thing is, her staff rank will always be better if you do promote her. But I'd say you don't lose out on much by not promoting her, because you just get Cecilia. But she's around for longer, so I'd say, yeah, on average she is better than Cecilia. It is kind of a toss-up, though. They're very close, I'd say. Alright. Next up, I'll put Echidna and Barter. They're both very, very serviceable pre-promotes. You get about halfway through the game. Get Barter in B route, Echidna in A route. Echidna is fast, but doesn't hit particularly hard. Barter is the exact opposite. He hits like a truck. He probably won't be doubling much. Now with Barter, he does get bows. He has bows and axes, since he's a warrior, while Echidna's a hero, so she gets swords and axes. If this were any other game, swords and axes would easily be worse than bows and axes. Well, no, I won't say that. Bows are pretty good in this game as well. Bows and swords are pretty good in FE6, while they're usually bad in other games. So I'd say they're pretty comparable classes. Swords are the best one-range weapon type, while bows are not the best two-range, but very useful. Base Barter he's very useful in later chapters like 21, so he can do pretty big chip with a steel bow against wyverns. Whereas Echidna, she's just a very decent filler hero that you can just deploy. Don't need to worry about training her, and she'll perform. She won't be your best combat unit, but she's very good filler, just like Barter. Alright, next up, let's see. Shin. Shin, I'd say, is definitely high tier. His combat's quite a bit better than Sue's, since he gets hard mode bonuses. Doesn't need as much investment as Sue, though you do need her to recruit him, so I guess you may as well take note of that. But besides that, his only real weakness is his D-rank bows. So he can't really use killer bows or any of the stronger bows at base, but it shouldn't take him a significant amount of time to get to C and then promote. Yeah, I'd say he's solid combat, he's mounted. His only takeaway is just bow locked and D-base bows. Those are his only negatives. Alright. Who is next? I'd say Fear. She's a very middling unit, I'd say. Her bases aren't solid enough for her point in the game. You can train her decently easily if you'd want to. But her main takeaway is that she's a diet Rutger, essentially. Comparable bases, but in hard mode, at least. But Rutger's just around for way longer. He should be promoted by the time you get Fear. So he's leagues better than she is, and she struggles to get a hero crest, I'd say. I'd say Rutger and Deke are both likelier to get a hero crest than she is. She's still not bad by any means. Very solid combat. She doesn't have good 1-2, but you don't need good 1-2 to be a standout unit in this game. But yeah, I'd say she joins just a little bit too late for a unit her level. Training her, again, as I said, isn't particularly difficult, but training her is slightly harder than Rutger. Payoff is slightly worse than Rutger. She joins later than Rutger. Overall, she's just Rutger if he was an average unit instead of one of the best in the game. Alright, let's see. Who's up next? I'd say Douglas is up next. He's definitely low tier. In an average run, he's definitely better than Boars. You can field him as a filler tank if you'd like, though I'd say you definitely don't need a filler tank most of the time, but he has niche use. His base weapon ranks are good. He can use silver lances, silver axes, anything you want him to, really. Although he will need to get to S if you want him to use legendary weapons. But yeah, I'd say overall, Douglas is bad, but not quite as bad as the other armors. And Lolina and Sophia. Alright, next, let's see. Nime. Let's say she's the top of high tier. Very good staff user, one of the best in the game. Only held back by her availability. Very solid bases, even her combat isn't that bad. Anyways, as I was saying, her combat's pretty decent, her base magic is insane. If she does get to Apocalypse, or S-Rank Dark is what I meant to say, she can equip Apocalypse and then just Warp, because it gives 5 magic. That'll buff her Warp range. She's arguably the best Warper in the game, but she's not quite as good as Saul just because she isn't around for nearly as long as he is. But if she joined even a little earlier, I'd be very comfortable with putting her in high tier. But since she doesn't, I'm not really gonna put her that high. Alright, next up, let's see, who should I rate next? Who? More like Hugh. Hugh is very... I'd say he's probably better than the... it's hard to say. You can insert promote him, just like Ray. And his combat is very okay if you do insert promote him. He hits res, he'll double some things if you pay full price for him, so he has max speed. And a funny glitch that occurs in the most recent patch, the English patch for FE6, is that if you say no to him 5 times and buy him at the lowest price of 5,000 gold, his stats will actually underflow, his magic and skill will, to like 40 something. Now they will go down to the class caps if you have him attack something, however you can promote him, and his stats will just go up to the Sage caps. Now I'm not going to count that for him, since that is a glitch, but it is something to know if you're planning on using Hugh in the future. If you want a capped magic Sage, capped skill Sage, it's just something to consider. It is a pretty funny glitch. Yeah, he hits res, uses one of the best weapon types, but again, he joins too late, and unlike Zeus, his bases aren't outstanding to the point where you'll look at him and be like, oh yes, I definitely want to use this guy. Even then, you might not say that about Zeus, but Zeus, at least, his combat is really good, whereas Hughes is just very eh. Plus he is bad join time, joins the same chapter as Zeus. So yeah, I'd say it's hard to justify using Hugh, but he's filler. Filler magic user. Not awful. Next up, let's see. Alright, I'll say Tate is at the bottom of high tier. She's like Shauna, though she joins later. Her bases are better, but she won't be quite as good as a trained Shauna, since Shauna, if you do train her, should be promoted by the time you get Tate. Or Tate, Thany, I don't know what she's called. I'm pretty sure it's Tate. So yeah, comparing the two, Shauna's around for longer. Tate takes less investment, but definitely not as good as Shauna. Since she's around less, to ferry less, plus her con, I think it doesn't matter too much. I'm pretty sure Shauna has like 1 more aid than her. So that is something in Shauna's favor. So yeah, she's just decent flyer. What else can you say about her, really? Alright, Klein. Klein is he's a pretty good sniper. He takes no investment to be promoted. His decent offensive bases, especially for his joint time, they're pretty good. Again, the best thing about him is being a bow user, because he will automatically be useful in chapters like 21, where you're just swarmed with wyverns. I'd say he's definitely not the strongest unit ever, but he's definitely good. Definitely good. Good. He can use silver bows at base, something going for him. So even if you never train him until chapter 21, he can do big damage to wyverns. But I'd say that's the best thing he has going for him. Other than that, he's just good filler. Good filler, as opposed to mediocre filler, like say Hugh. Alright, next up, let's see. I'd say Garrett is definitely low tier. He's sort of like bootleg Barter, joins quite a bit later than Barter. and doesn't get bows like Barter does, though he's a Berserker. They have very comparable bases. I'd say Barter is just better because he joins earlier and has better axe rank, and he can use bows. Although Garrett does have crit plus 30 to kinda counter Barter having bows. I'd just say the difference in availability is the biggest gap between the two. Plus the fact that Garrett can't really do much against Wyverns, while Barter is very useful against them. Plus I'm pretty sure Barter has higher strength than Garrett, and both don't really double a ton, so Barter will typically hit harder. Again, Garrett's not awful. I'd still say he's on the lower side. Maybe I'd go as far to put him in the bottom of mid-tier. Maybe. Well, I don't know. I'd say Wade is still better. Not quite sure, though. Garrett's definitely a tough one. But I'm saying I'm comfortable with him being... Actually, you know what? I'll put him at the bottom of mid-tier. I think he belongs there. Now, as for someone who definitely belongs in low tier, I'd say Corel. Corel is just... He's not atrocious. His biggest problem is joining in Chapter 23. The game's basically almost over by then. So, Corel doesn't really bring much to the table. Though for those 2 chapters that he is around, he is decent filler. But again, why would you... Like, a unit who's around for 2 chapters and is really strong still isn't that great, in my opinion. I guess he's definitely better than the 4 trash gods, being Barth, Lelina, Wendy, and Sophia, but not by a ton. In fact, you know what? I'd go as far. Barth isn't bottom 3. Barth is not bottom 3, I wouldn't say. Comes close, but not quite bottom 3. I believe Carol, he can use Durandal at base, so if you somehow don't have anybody with S-rank swords, he can do that and be useful that way, but yeah, he's definitely not a standout at all. Alright, next, let's see. I'd say Yoder, mid-tier above Garrett. He's not around for a lot. He is around for longer than Corel. He is a staff user, unlike Corel, and he can use any staff in the game. Anyone you want him to. So I'd say that's why he's in mid-tier, despite his very bad availability. Just by being a staff user, decent staff user. He's only around for, let's count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chapters. So that is a lot better than Carol's 2 chapters. So yeah, I'd say Yoder, mid-tier. One of the worst healers, but only because of his availability. He does take no investment to be as good as he is, but again, not around for that long. Long enough to be good. Really good anyways. Alright, let's see. I say Diane is at the top of low tier. He's very okay filler, but he's just not around for long enough to do much, if you ask me. Like, he's a very okay bow user. He can do damage to wyverns. He is mounted. Can use swords if you need him to. But besides that, what does he really do? He's only around for a handful of chapters. And yet his bases aren't amazing to the point where you'd consider fielding him over anybody you've trained. So I'd say again, he's not necessarily awful. He's just not amazing. He doesn't stand out in any way. So maybe he's mid-tier, but eh. I'd say I'm fine with him being at the top of low tier. Same with the Juno, actually. Juno is very mediocre. She is a flyer, but her combat is just awful, and her availability is not good either. The best thing she does is fly. while the best thing Diane does is shoot things with a bow. Let's say they're both very comparable, both aren't amazing, but you can field them and you won't lose out on much of anything. Alright, next up, let's see. Igren. She's like... I'll put her below Noah. She's like a Klein. She's like Klein, they have very similar bases, and I think hers are actually very slightly better. But she joins in chapter 15. Yeah, 15. Whereas Klein joins as soon as chapter 10 in B route, or 11 in A route. So he's definitely around for longer. His bow rank is way better than hers. Hers is C, if I remember correctly, which isn't bad. She can use killer bows. So she's not awful. It's just it will take a bit of effort if you want her to use silvers against wyverns. But she's very serviceable. Definitely a mid-tier unit. She's good filler, just like Klein. One of the better bow users in the game, just like Klein. But I'd say availability and bow rank is what holds her back from being high tier like Klein, if you ask me. Alright, next up. Fa. Fa is definitely a difficult one. I'll put her above Gim. It's so hard to rate her. I'll put her above Garrett. She has use. Enemies will target her with siege tomes. They will target her with status staves. And she's very good at tanking those for you. So strategically, you can use her as bait for stuff like that. Her combat isn't stellar. She can hit a Manakee or two for you, if you'd like. But, she's not amazing. You can field her. She has uses. And then now we're just left with Merlinus and the Thieves. Merlinus, I'll put at the bottom of top tier. Inventory management is very strong. You can do a lot of it in battle preps, but if you're going to do extensive shopping and selling, you will have to bring Merlinus with you. And yeah, he's just nice to have around with you on any map with a shop. If you ever want to do buying and selling, it's just, he's your man. And he's useful for those purposes. So yeah, I'd say bottom of top tier Merlinus. Then as for the Thieves, Thief utility is kind of hard to measure. I'd say Astor, Chad, Kath. She definitely has uses as a thief, but only she doesn't join until quite a bit later than the other two. And she doesn't do anything better than them. Her bases are bad. Astor, he's top tier because not only is he a thief, he's a solid combat unit against axe users anyways. He's sort of like Legault from FE7 in that sense. Chad, he's your first thief. He'll open things Astor never can. And then the same token, Astor and Chad will both open things Kath never can, because you can't get her until chapter 12 at the earliest. Though, thief utility is enough that I'd say I'd put her in mid-tier. Just because there are things to being a thief that, it's kind of hard to measure just how good they are. Most of the stealables in FE6 aren't that amazing. You never steal, like, say, stat boosters or... well, you do steal promotion items, but not until late. Like, you know, Murdoch has a Night Crest. You can steal the Delphi Shield off of Narshan, so that is something. But yeah, they all have utility, it's just that Chad joins first, which is why he's near the top. Astor has really sick bases, so he's just an upgraded Chad at the point you get him. And then Kath is just, she is worse. She has the worst aspects of the two combined, which is bad bases and worse availability. But yeah, wow, that took quite a while to rate all the units in this game. How long was it exactly? Ooh, 50 minutes. I can't believe that. But yeah, wow. Let me know what you think. I know there's probably quite a bit here that if I sat down and thought about it for longer, I'd probably move some people, but you know what, that's what making tier list videos is for. You get to hear my reasoning, you can argue in the comments, or tell me what you think. If you think I rated anybody stupidly, let me know. So yeah, this was a fun 100 subscriber special. And again, thank you all for helping me reach 100 subscribers. It's pretty awesome. Anyways, I'll catch you later. Peace out.